oficio y aún queda por ahí mucho indio que no sabe lo que es vivir en una ciudad.
Como la gente.
Que no ves que eres un puente entre el salvajismo y el modernismo. Salvador, el ingeniero, salvador de la humanidad. Pero ¿por qué no? Tú te acuerdas que la nuestra es una
Everyone that's here so far. We're just going to wait a couple minutes for more folks to join in.
¿No ves que nuestra mente no debe tomar en cuenta ecologistas, indigenistas, retrogradistas ni humanistas? Ay, mis ingenieros civiles y asociados, no crean que no me duele irme de su lado, pero es que yo pienso que ha llegado el tiempo de darle lugar a los espacios sin cemento. Por eso yo ya me voy. No quiero tener nada que ver con esa fea relación de acción, construcción, destrucción. ¿Cómo es que te vas, Salvador, de la compañía si todavía hay mucho verdor? Ay, mis compañeros petroleros mexicanos, no crean que no extraño el olor a óleo puro, pero es que yo pienso que nosotros los humanos no necesitamos más hidrocarburos. Por eso yo ya me voy. No quiero tener nada que ver con esa fea relación de acción, construcción, destrucción.
We can get started. The song's almost over. You can let it play it out. Just want to welcome everyone, UAW family and friends, to UAWD's Building a Worker-Led EV Transition for People, Not Profit. Just a reminder that this will be recorded. And thank you for joining us on this lovely Saturday afternoon. The song you were just listening to is by one of my favorite bands, Café Tacuba. They're a Spanish rock band from Mexico City. And this song, called Trópico de Cáncer, is about a petroleum engineer who tells his coworkers that he no longer wants to contribute to the destruction of the earth. And it really resonates with me as a worker and also as a climate justice activist. As I said, we are recording this presentation so we can share it with folks who aren't able to make it today, and we'll share the link with everyone who registered. For those new to Unite All Workers for Democracy, or UAWD, we are a Democratic caucus of UAW members building a rank and file movement. We got our start by winning one member, one vote, and then campaigned for President Shawn Fain. We put on organizing trainings and also work with members to build strong fighting locals. Feel free to put your introductions in the chat, what local you're from. And for UAW members here, we're actually in the middle of a leadership training series with the next session on Sunday, April 13th, Building Worker Power Through Solidarity Unionism. And you can register at the link provided in the chat, which is uawd.org/leadership-2025. And now I'd like to introduce my co-panelists. First, we have Martha Gravatt, a retired member of UAW Local 869, UAW member since 1987, and co-chair of UAWD's EV committee. Next will be Toli Rinberg, member of Local 22, GM Factory Zero, and got his start in the UAW as a member of Local 5118, the Harvard Graduate Students Union. He's also a co-chair of the EV committee and the organizing committee within UAWD. Lastly, myself, Marcy Pedraza. I've been a union electrician for 26 years, member of UAW Local 551, Fort Chicago Assembly Plant, and I'm the board president of the Southeast Environmental Task Force, which is a grassroots organization in my community that fights for environmental justice. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the Climate and Community Institute as well for research and support on this work, in particular, Matt Haugen and Batul Hassan, who did a lot of the research for this presentation. So for the structure of the session, we will have a roughly 40-minute slideshow that we will present, and then we'll have a 30-minute open discussion at the end. So the goal of this presentation is to equip you with a rigorous analysis of how the auto industry got to the point we are today, where the EV transition is heading, especially with under the influence of the Trump administration, and how we might be able to build worker power in response. But first, why are we talking about EVs? And the answer is the climate crisis. Next slide. 2024 has been confirmed as the hottest year in recorded history, breaking the previous record set in 2023. Changes to the climate have been harming workers and communities through worsening droughts, wildfires, flooding, and other extreme weather. The climate crisis is here and promises to get much worse in the future without serious action. The crisis is primarily driven by greenhouse gas emissions produced by burning fossil fuels. Next slide. Transportation accounts for 28% of US greenhouse gas emissions, the most of any sector, a majority of which comes from cars with internal combustion engines. Gas-powered transportation also contributes to ongoing air pollution, leading to thousands of early deaths in the US and numerous negative health effects, asthma, heart disease, Alzheimer's, etc. So in the face of this massive looming threat, what is the corporate response? Next slide. This enormous EV Hummer captures it perfectly. A 10,000-pound vehicle with a 3,000-pound lithium-ion battery that costs $130,000. And you can see here former President Biden advertising this vehicle. U.S. climate policy, like the Inflation Reduction Act passed under President Biden, made this possible by subsidizing EV production and consumer purchases. The EV Hummer really shows what the auto company solution is to transportation decarbonization and vehicle pollution reduction. It is slow, unjust, and driven by corporations seeking more profit. And now with the Trump administration in power, what will the corporate solution look like? What will happen to the auto industry as the administration imposes tariffs and attempts to roll back EPA regulations and EV subsidies? We'll get to answering these questions later in the presentation, but as this PR stunt with Elon Musk and President Trump shows, those in charge may be more concerned with selling products than creating safe and healthy conditions for workers and communities. And yes, safe and affordable EVs will need to be a part of the broader response to climate change, but who is currently deciding what we build and who do those decisions serve? The corporations and unfortunately even some union officials like to say that workers should be happy to have a job and healthcare, but never talk about the harms that come from their corporate strategy, which are felt by workers and communities. This corporate-led approach results in crises not only from the shop floor, but up to an industry-wide level. And it's important for us as organizers to analyze and understand this so that we can develop a rank-and-file strategy in response. Next slide. These crises occur at all different scales, affecting different numbers of workers. Tens to hundreds in the shop area you work in, hundreds to thousands at the factory level, and tens of thousands at the company level, and hundreds of thousands, maybe even over 1 million at the industry level. Next slide. And we've all heard about the terrible fires in battery plants. In South Korea in June 2024, a South Korean EV battery plant fire killed 22 workers. And just last August, a vehicle ignited at a Rivian factory in Illinois, burning down 50 cars around it. And this is a non-union plant. For all of 2024, GM's Factory Zero, which makes electric Hummers, forced workers in their battery department to work 7 days a week, exploiting a loophole in the contract around launching new vehicles. Next slide, we'll get into the factory effects like shift layoffs and plant closures, which can be devastating to local communities. Stellantis attempted to renege on their promise to reopen and expand the Belvidere plant for EV production, which was agreed to in the 2023 UAW contract, despite receiving $335 million from the federal government to convert it to an EV complex. They cited, quote unquote, market conditions. And Belvidere is a city of just 25,000 people. I used to live there. I worked there for 3.5 years in their paint department. And so the effect of this factory closure and layoffs is large, with restaurants and other service industry businesses closing or slowing down. And through a campaign to make Stellantis keep the promise and threatening to strike over the plant closure, the UAW was able to pressure Stellantis to stick to their 2027 opening date. But uncertainty remains for laid-off workers, many of whom are still dealing with financial stress, lost houses, homelessness, food insecurity, and families split apart as workers move for a job and leave their families behind. Next slide. Other big shift layoffs that have been announced in 2024, GM is laying off 1,700 workers in Kansas, Stellantis laying off up to 2,450 workers in Warren, and thousands of temporary workers at Stellantis affected over the last year. Now I have a question for our audience. Who has been a part of a plant that's laid off a shift? Please let us know which plant and where in the chat. Next, we'll look at the company level. Next slide. One of the most striking examples is one that folks are very familiar with, Flint, Michigan. GM was founded in Flint in 1908 and built a large manufacturing base there, growing in tandem with the city, nicknamed Vehicle City. Then GM mostly withdrew from Flint over decades, starting with a retreat to nearby suburbs. In the 70s and 80s, many plants closed in Flint, and unemployment at one point exceeded 25%. GM's Flint area employment fell from 80,000 in 1978 to around 7,000 in 2015 after further plant closures. This left behind economic collapse, a loss of city revenue, deteriorating infrastructure, polluted soil and water, and ultimately resulted in the Flint water crisis. Next slide. And on the industry level, workers bore the brunt of the 2008 auto industry crash, leading to a massive reduction in wages and jobs. Workers hired after 2008 lost post-retirement health care and pensions. 54 plants shut down from 2008 to 2010. And in the entire auto sector, including parts plants and non-union shops, employment decreased by roughly 500,000. And I come from the southeast side of Chicago, which was once the hub of the steel industry. My father and grandfathers worked at the steel mills, and I've seen the devastating impact that plant closures have on the community. And we're still feeling it today with toxic legacy and unjust zoning policies. So another audience question, how many of you worked at a plant that was ever shut down? And how many of you had to relocate due to a plant closure? Feel free to share in the chat. Next slide. But where are we now in 2025? Is the corporate-led transition still ongoing? Or is it restructuring, stalling, or reversing? Given all the policy turbulence and chaos from the Trump administration, could we be on the verge of another auto recession? Now I'd like to send it over to Toli. To answer these questions, we're going to zoom out to understand the bigger patterns and harms that come from a corporate-led strategy. Now I'll hand it over to Toli.
Thanks, Marcy, and good to be here with everybody. So the corporate-led strategy, it is ongoing and it's for-profit, market-based, and unplanned. But how do we understand how to organize and respond? And in order to do that, we have to be rooted in a solid understanding of the economics and incentives of the auto industry and how it operates. So we're going to get into the weeds here a bit and show why the status quo, such as it is, of the transition is only working for the corporations, but don't worry, we'll be sharing a recording of this presentation, and the slide deck will be made available on our webpage. So please, you'll receive an email following this presentation. But right now, we're going to get into a bit of the history and take a look at what's happening in the current moment. So one of the most impactful decisions a corporation can make that affects workers and communities is plant closures. It's a major decision, so understanding why it happens or where and when plants open gives us insight into how the industry operates. In 1979, there were 447 auto plants operating in the US. Between then and 2011, 267 or 60% of plants closed, typically for another industrial use. But repurposing has significant barriers and costs. Harms coming from construction, environmental impacts, and the employment rarely comes close to the same levels as before. US auto production used to be geographically concentrated, manufacturing parts, etc., in close proximity. Then the big three spread it out to limit strike leverage. Through plant closures, the US auto industry was able to restructure geographically. For example, the big three expanded significantly in Mexico in the 1980s, and especially after the passage of NAFTA in the 90s. NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Agreement that essentially eliminated tariffs on exports between Canada, US, and Mexico. In large part, this was done to access much cheaper labor, and it's still paying off for the corporations today. In the GM Silao plant in Mexico, which employs over 6,000 workers, makes a Sierra and Silverado, workers make about $4 an hour. This has given the big three leverage. If workers in the US demand more, GM can threaten to continue expansion in Mexico. What about in the US? Well, UAW membership peaked at 1.5 million in 1979, but in 2024, it had 370,000 total members, with only 150,000 members at the big three, in part as a result of this restructuring. While overall employment in the auto industry has gone up recently, it has reduced drastically in certain regions. Foreign-owned auto companies have taken market share from the big three and mostly opened plants in the, quote, right-to-work South, where around 30% of auto jobs are now located. This plot shows that in southern states like Alabama, Texas, Kentucky, Tennessee, manufacturing jobs grew by 27,000 from 2004 to 2022. Meanwhile, in the Midwest, 35,000 jobs were lost. Okay, so to take a zoomed out picture, here the orange line represents employment in the entire manufacturing sector. So this includes parts and non-union shops. So it's not just the UAW. It's plants that are somehow connected to the auto industry. So it's a bit of an expanded view. While there have been massive fluctuations in employment, including the 500,000 drop following the 2008 crash, employment levels have roughly returned to the pre-crash levels. Meanwhile, you see in the blue line there, union density has steadily declined. This again is in large part due to the move to the South and other non-union competitors like Tesla and Rivian entering the scene. Okay, so through this restructuring over the past decades, auto companies have shaped and reshaped the transportation system and production to maximize their profits to the detriment of our environment and to workers. Since the 1980s, federal transportation funding has been allocated roughly 80% to highways and 20% to public transit, in part due to the auto company influence. Auto lobbyists are responsible for pushing the, quote, SUV loophole in emissions regulations and to pursue higher profit margins. As Sean Fain liked to remind us during the stand-up strike, even after their massive economic collapse, the big three made more than $250 billion in profits over the last decade. Meanwhile, over the last 4 years, prices across the board have gone up, hurting consumers, 40% increase for used cars and trucks, 30% for repairs and insurance, and in 2022, transportation was the second largest household expenditure behind housing, accounting for 15% of average household spending. Meanwhile, corporations are making US cars bigger and bigger. The average US car is 34% heavier than it was in 1980, And you can see this yellow wedge, which is the truck SUV, has greatly increased in the last 20 years. This means more pollution, more wear and tear, more costs of parts repairs, harm to pedestrians, cyclists, wildlife, and other motorists. In two vehicle crashes, the weight of the other vehicle is highly correlated with deadliness, and EVs are heavier than the gas-powered equivalent. Remember the EV Hummer? It weighs 10,000 pounds. So gas-powered cars emit greenhouse gas emissions and deadly particulate air pollution from the tailpipes, and all cars produce large amounts of tire and brake dust pollution. Each year in the US, millions of animals and over 40,000 people die from car accidents. And cars are not just cars. They produce infrastructure, demands roads, highways, parking lots. They divide cities in often racially unjust ways, increasing their temperature and taking up space that can be put to better use for healthy living. So at this point, you might be thinking, why am I getting all this information about how cars are harmful in a presentation to auto workers? Well, if we as union organizers and workers have a say in how society is shaped, we should understand the role of our industry and be honest about it so we can have a serious conversation about where we want to head next. What role might the UAW have in not just building cars, but also buses, which we already do, e-bikes, maybe trains? For context, here's a side-by-side comparison of how much space 70 people fit in a bus, on bikes, or in cars. You might ask what else we could do with this space. So transit ridership peaked around 1940 in the US, but it has dropped precipitously since then and has essentially not changed in the last 50 years. Meanwhile, the average vehicles traveled per person has steadily increased in the US until about 2010. And we know that addressing climate change will require shifting this balance between public transit and personal vehicles. There's no way around that. And the question is, do we as workers want to be part of that future? If we ever move away from car dominance in our society, it's going to have to come with a political struggle too. Auto executives have a lot to lose if we move towards a society with more public transit. And they want auto workers to think so too. But we don't have to accept that premise. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. I'd just like to add as well that EVs add another dimension of resource extraction for batteries that come with social and ecological harms to frontline communities, including pollution, freshwater depletion, biodiversity loss, violation of indigenous sovereignty. This photo on the left is a photo of lithium evaporation pools, a highly water-intensive method being used to purify the mineral known as white gold for battery production. This photo on the right is of an indigenous tribe in Nevada that is protesting a mining project on sacred burial ground. It's done by a for-profit mining company that is backed by General Motors, which invested $650 million into the project, and all of that lithium is promised back to GM. This is part of US and GM's effort to be less dependent on the international supply chain. And finally, this trend will be exacerbated by existing levels of car dependency and size. An electric Hummer requires far more lithium per rider than electric buses or e-bikes. And according to research from the Climate and Community Institute, an EV transition with fewer and smaller cars could use 92% less lithium. And even just smaller cars could use 42% less lithium. Okay, so you've heard a little about the history of the auto industry's restructuring and the push for control over car dominance, but where are we now? Well, the first part is straightforward. The corporate-led EV transition is underway, and in 2024, battery EVs were around 7% of both new car sales and production. This map shows investment EVs by state. The darkest green are states with more than $10 billion in investment. Federal legislation under Biden provided incentives for domestic EV and battery manufacturing and consumer purchases. For example, the $330 million grant that Marcy mentioned, which went to Belvedere to open the EV complex. States are competing to provide financial incentives to companies for EV battery production, and EV investments are thus far concentrated in these right-to-work states, or the emerging battery belt, plus Michigan, Ohio, Illinois. So you could see that this kind of green zone right here. A 2023 analysis looked at how the industry will evolve under the corporate-led transition before the Trump administration came to power. Here you see short-term projections of increase in green and decrease in red in light vehicle production by 2029. Most EVs are expected to be produced at converted internal combustion engine or ICE factories. Batteries will be produced in new factories, and engine plants will close. Production will rearrange geographically, but overall, employment is projected to stay the same or increase. This comes from recent granular analysis, and it's actually contrary to the claim that EVs will need 30% fewer jobs, which some auto execs have claimed. It's hard to see a definitive trend, but we already see that the corporate-led transition will mean whipsawing, playing different plants against each other. Okay, so into this already difficult to predict landscape enters the Trump administration. Despite one of his closest political allies being Elon Musk, the owner of Tesla, Trump has regularly attacked EVs during the election and as president. In his executive order, Unleashing American Energy, he claimed to repeal Biden's non-existent EV mandate, which was merely a goal of reaching 50% EV sales by 2030. What is the reality? Well, there are several major regulations incentivizing EV production and consumption right now. From the Inflation Reduction Act, there is the EV Consumer Tax Credit, which provides up to $7,500 for purchasing qualifying EVs. There are also tax credits for domestic battery production and charging infrastructure. The Biden administration also initiated plans to transition the federal government fleet to EVs with requisite public charging infrastructure. Last year, the Biden EPA finalized a rule restricting the average tailpipe pollutions of automaker fleets for the years 2027 to 2032, reducing greenhouse gas emission standards by around half compared to 2026 regulation. This provides a strong incentive for companies to produce and sell EVs. And this is in addition to the Department of Energy, as well as state grants and loans on EV manufacturing. Okay, so the Trump administration has pledged to attack these regulations and incentives. So what have they done and what can they do? Well, most EV incentives in the IRA will legally require legislation to roll back. This will be challenging given the tight margin in the House and red state spending and moderate Republican support. However, they are skirting the law and trying to pause or stop spending mandated by Congress, like the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. These sorts of actions are or will be facing lawsuits. The Trump administration has also paused plans for the federal government to transition EVs and install new chargers, along with shutting down existing federal EV charging infrastructure. EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin has announced plans to roll back the Biden EPA emissions rule. However, this will take time and will be challenged in court. So I know this is a topic on many people's minds. What about tariffs? Trump's tariffs have already come in fits and starts, but right now there are wide-ranging tariffs already in place. 25% on Canada and Mexico, 10% on China, with some exceptions. Due to lobbying from Big Three execs, the auto industry has gotten a carve-out until early April. Why? Well, modern auto supply chains are vast and complex, with parts and components coming from all over the world. As you see in this diagram of a Chevy Silverado truck, the highlighted components are parts manufactured in Mexico, and in red are other countries that are involved, including China, Japan, Malaysia. The auto industry uses long-term projections and can't retool quickly in response to tariffs. And recall that the Big Three have a lot of incentive to be able to continue to use Mexico's cheaper labor supply. But when trying to think about political implications of tariffs, the first thing to understand is that there's no simple answer. It's not a tariffs good or tariff bad kind of perspective. There are many perspectives and interests at play, and sometimes they align, other times they contradict each other. You got to think about the Trump administration, corporate factions, Big Three, Tesla, foreign automakers, steel industry, international producers like China and Europe, unions like the UAW and United Steelworkers, and US workers, international workers at large. So when tariffs get imposed, there are actions and reactions that propagate through this entire system. Already we're seeing some retaliatory tariffs being placed on the US. Let's take a look at some case studies just to think through what might be happening. For one, tariffs might be imposed for international political leverage and not primarily for domestic industrialization. Perhaps Trump is using tariffs in the short term to build leverage to extract concessions from other countries. Automakers need medium and long-term stability to plan their investments, so it's likely we'll see waves of layoffs, especially in the EV facilities and not the ICE plants that make most of the profits, as corporations wait out this turbulence to see what happens next. The fact that Trump imposed tariffs, then the big three automakers lobbied him to carve out the auto industry, is evidence that these are not planned industrial moves. Ultimately, we may see a recession, but it's too early to tell, and Trump's moves are too unpredictable. Number two, let's say the tariffs are imposed for a longer duration. It could result in onshoring of foreign manufacturing. This would mean foreign automakers would build plants in the US, very likely the South, again in right-to-work states, to avoid unionization, as Japanese auto companies did in the 80s. While it's true that such tariffs would decrease international competition and perhaps increase worker leverage domestically, it could also further undermine the UAW in the new plants if the new plants remain non-union. This is why it's important to think about tariffs in combination with other domestic pro-worker and pro-union policies. So where are we with the corporate-led EV transition? Our current assessment is that there's no real evidence that there is an EV reversal, but different parts of the industry are undergoing some stalling and restructuring, while other parts are unaffected entirely. This is likely because of investment inertia, international EV market pressure, especially from China, major EV policies continuing to be in place, even if some portions are reversed. Tesla will keep moving forward, trying to crowd out the market, and big three companies may restructure more towards plug-in hybrids as a hedge. From that perspective, that might not be an unreasonable decision, given that charging infrastructure is lagging behind. And billions in investment have already been sunk. Battery supply chains are in the process of being restructured and onshored. So some EV policies will be reversed, maybe the consumer EV tax credit, but the IRA investments actually have a lot of support in red states, and the EPA regulations will take a long time to repeal and will face legal challenges. Certain states follow California standards, so there's buffering effects there, and tariffs are going to have the biggest effect short term. It's just unclear if it will be a long-term strategy of the Trump administration, so corporations may opt to weather that short-term instability. Recently, the UAW has come out for tariffs in a statement, in which the UAW even applauds Trump for, quote, aggressive action on ending the free trade disaster. We think there's a better approach, one that builds global workers' solidarity instead of undermining it. So what might that look like? And ultimately, what does a worker-led transition look like? For one, fighting for a cross-border wage floor is key. Without a wage floor, even with tariffs, unequal wages across countries ensures that there's continued threat of offshoring and cross-border whipsawing. The reason that Big Three moved plants to Mexico, enabled by these free trade agreements, is in large part because they can have access to cheaper labor. This allows the corporations to pit workers in the US against Mexico. With a wage floor, auto workers across borders have more stability and strength and can make collective demands on the corporations. Luckily, US auto workers are familiar with this fight. We must end all tiers at home and abroad. But more than tariffs, what workers benefit from most is predictable and long-term planning. Imagine launching a federal or state transition EV authorities that have mandates for 5 or 10 years to manufacture and plan infrastructure, led by worker leaders, guaranteeing that no layoffs for that entire period occur. By contrast, what we have right now is the opposite of planning. The IRA first put $7.5 billion in investment in EV chargers and only produced 7 in 2 years. Now the Trump administration may halt this further, and no wonder the companies are feeling uncertain. To offset massive increase in non-unionized manufacturing in the South, passing the PRO Act might make unionization easier. And even universal healthcare may help by increasing worker leverage to decouple healthcare from employment. So let's recap. Overall, auto sector employment has had massive fluctuations, but production is still overall steady for now. Auto production has moved to the south to right-to-work states. Vehicle size and vehicle prices have both increased. Union density has dropped over the last 50 years. Worker rights, wages, and benefits have decreased and still not fully recovered. Corporations have continued to make profits even through economic crashes and maintain a stranglehold on the industry and its regulation, blocking expansion of public transit. Dozens of facilities have been closed and communities devastated. The transition is proceeding in fits and starts, as Marcy talked about earlier at Belvedere, and across the big three with layoffs and shift reductions with no predictable plan. The uncertainty is harming workers and communities, and the Trump administration is injecting even more uncertainty through tariffs and possible policy reversals. Attacking workers will make this even worse. We talked a little bit about what an alternative to pro-worker trade and domestic policy might look like, but how does this fit into a bigger worker-led strategy that's based on building rank and file power? For that, I'm going to pass it off to Martha Gravatt to take it over, the next part of the conversation. Oh, and you're still muted.
How's that? Can everyone hear me?
There we go.
Okay. Can you put the slides back on?
It should be up. Can you see that?
It's showing me, I'm seeing that I'm spotlighted. Does everyone else see the slides?
It looks like people are nodding yes, so.
Okay. Folks, we need a worker-led transition, one for people, not for profit. We know from history, and we've just heard here, that for-profit and market-driven production will lead to economic booms and busts, negatively impacting workers and their communities, and will result in production that is misaligned with public needs. To transition to a just and sustainable economy, production will need to be reoriented away from the profit motive and toward what is socially necessary and useful. This will require democratic planning by the majority class, the working class. Auto workers will have an opportunity to organize for this to their benefit and that of society at large. In the short term, that means fighting for worker power and a just EV transition. Fight for worker safety, job security, and a shorter work week. In the long term, we must prepare auto workers for a political alternative and to be leaders in providing clean and safe transportation, which is organized by workers and communities. That means thinking more expansively about what we produce and how we produce it. Maybe some auto factories could convert to making electric buses, electric freight trucks, or e-bikes. Research from a forthcoming Climate and Community Institute report shows that a shift towards more and better public transit could require over 120,000 jobs. Manufacturing electric buses, bikes, and scooters, and their batteries. Every $1 billion investment in public transit creates 50,000 jobs overall. So how do we organize for a worker-led transition? Our organizing must match the scale of the crisis. At the shop area level, we should be ready to build strong fighting locals, train organizers, shop stewards, and rank and file leaders, fight over health and safety grievances, speed ups, and unfair production standards. These are all strikeable grievances under our contracts. And let's fight over layoffs. At the factory level, we must organize, unionize non-union shops, as the UAW is currently doing in the South, and target Tesla to make sure to cover all EV production. Bargain and strike for product and employment guarantees and to prevent plant closures, such as, for example, the Stellantis Keep the Promise campaign. But how do we respond to the next factory closure? What about on the company and industry-wide scale? Let's bargain and strike for a shorter work week. Fight to bring back the jobs bank, which kept workers working rather than going on a market-driven layoff, but which was given up during the 2008 to 2009 concessions. Maybe revive the jobs bank as a green jobs bank, making workers climate and community leaders in their communities. These demands can be raised during the 2028 general strike as called for by President Sean Fain. It's up to us to raise these demands. Leading up to that, launch worker planning committees to evaluate product decisions and democratically decide on what product we think should be built. But what happens when the companies go bankrupt again? How do we deal with the next bankruptcy? Will we accept another Flint? Or will we fight for worker control of factories, guaranteeing our right to a job and where we, the workers, plan production? There are some lessons we can learn from history. For example, the Lucas Plan. In 1976, British trade unionists on the Lucas Aerospace Combine Shop Stewards Committee drafted an alternative corporate plan for their employer, defense firm Lucas Aerospace, to transition to producing goods that answered social needs. This organizing around an alternative corporate strategy was spurred by the 1974 announcement of company restructuring. About half of Lucas Aerospace production supplied publicly funded military contracts. Organizers argued that instead of layoffs, with the state funding redundancy, i.e. unemployment, allowances, state funds should be diverted to socially useful projects. Despite international support for the Combine's alternative corporate plan, the proposal was rejected by Lucas Aerospace management. Lack of political will from the Labor Party government and trade union movement contributed to the failure to implement the alternative corporate plan. But the plan remains an example of how to build another production model, one that prioritizes human needs over war profits. And more recently, there was Green Jobs Oshawa. On November 26, 2018, General Motors announced a number of plant closures in North America, the largest of which was in Oshawa, Canada, with thousands of workers affected. A worker-led group called Green Jobs Oshawa emerged and called for the nationalization of the facility. They commissioned an engineering study to describe the feasibility of converting the facility toward producing a fleet of world-class electric vehicles, which would be purchased through government contracts. Their logic was, keep the plants and skills in the community and retool the facility toward socially useful products, not to beg GM to stay and be betrayed by GM again. The company ended up bringing back a fraction of the workers they laid off, which took the wind out of the movement's sails. Ultimately, Both the union and the corporation opposed the initiative, but not before it gained strong community support and showed that a political alternative is possible and worth considering. Lastly, let's go back to Argentina during the 2001 financial crisis. During Argentina's massive financial crisis and debt default in 2001, many businesses went bankrupt and closed. Unemployment rose to around 20%, similar to what Flint faced in the 1980s. In the wake of this crisis, a movement of workers taking control of shuttered factories sprang up. The movement's motto was Occupy, Resist, Produced. They reopened buildings, turned on machines, and fought in court for worker ownership in the form of cooperatives. Many of those factories faced legal challenges, but workers were able to fight back with the help of a national conversion organization. The 2004 documentary, The Take, follows a group of auto workers who turned their clothes plant into a worker co-op. In another case, a tile factory that was taken over redirected a fraction of the production to build a local health center that the community had long wanted, exemplifying what local democratic planning could look like. What if, instead of letting GM devastate Flint, we could have a worker-run Flint Clean Transportation Manufacturing Hub? There are different ownership models. Private ownership is not the only option. Other models, like government and worker ownership, exist in the US and internationally. What workers can do now, especially with all the added uncertainty and turbulence from the Trump administration, it's more important than ever to have an understanding of the auto industry and how it's evolving. What can you do? You can give this presentation at your local. You can get active in your local. For example, join the education committee. Help start a UAW-wide rank and file watchdog committee to see how retooling and new technology are being used to cut jobs. Pass resolutions in your local calling for bargaining for a shorter work week. Work with UAWD to prepare a worker control plan for the next factory shutdown or company bankruptcy. You can go to our website, uawd.org/EVC, or drop your name and contact info in the chat if you'd like to work with us on these issues. What world do we want to live in? One where the corporations make all the decisions, or one where workers and communities make decisions? Thank you. I'm going to turn it back to Marcy so we can have some Q&A and some discussion. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha and Toli. Yeah, so that everyone can see the final slide with the credits basically, and we'd like to open up this part for discussion. If you want to put your raise your hand or put your stack in the chat, we can get started with that. Okay, I see Herman you have your hand up, and we're going to limit the comments to 2 to 3 minutes for the sake of time. You can go ahead and unmute.
Don't worry, I don't have that much. I thought your environmental piece was excellent. It's very inspiring to see that, particularly the way you relativize the future of cars. private personal transportation and the need for mass transit. I just want to make a few. I was involved in the Green Jobs Oshawa, and we're still sort of there, waiting to be resurrected once they start closing down the production of the trucks they're producing now, the ICE trucks. A couple of points. Number one, public ownership is absolutely critical. I know it's very hard to raise, particularly in the United States, but workers are not going to be able to own or take over a huge auto assembly plant and make it sustainable. It's very difficult. There are very few examples. However, public ownership is a critical component. But obviously, if the public, institutions are very much against what you stand for, it's difficult. It also means finding financing, which also needs to be taken away from the private banking and dependent upon those sources. Some of the successful pieces in Argentina were able to set up some of those things. The third thing, though, I think is really important is that in order to convince our members about this kind of stuff, you got to do lots of education. And it's not just talking at them. This takes time. When we did Green Jobs Oshawa, we didn't have much agreement among a lot of the members because they hoped that GM would in fact reinvest in some way, and the union supported them. So that was a tough sell, although we had some people involved, and we did have support in the community. But you got to be able to organize that way in locals and across the industry. I just want to. The final thing is that I'm from Canada, and we found the Trump's tariffs are ridiculous. They have no point for the industry, and having the leadership, especially we looked up to the UAW leadership in terms of the strikes, the strategy you guys had in terms of the revolution you had in the union, which is very positive. UAWD played a big role in making that happen. But you got to speak out against those tariffs. It will destroy the Canadian auto industry, and there's no reason that has to happen. The international solidarity means that unions in the different countries have to figure out ways to make sure that we look after all of the things you're talking about and how we can support each other doing that. But to propagate the lies that Trump is doing, that somehow this is about it's about free trade, it isn't. It's about destroying a competitive an industry where in fact in Canada we've lost jobs, tremendous amount of jobs in production because of free movement of capital and free trade. So we're opposed to free trade, but the tariffs in this instance really are not a challenge to free trade. They basically are hyper nationalist propaganda from Trump in order to appease his base. And the leadership of your union needs to change, and UAWD needs to speak out against it. Speak out in a way that we in Canada can hear. Anyway, thanks. I thought that this is a very, very inspiring day, and thank you guys for doing this.
Thank you for your comments. Next, I have, just by seeing the raised hands, we'll go with Adriana, Andrew, and then Frank Hammer. So Adriana, go ahead. Unmute.
Hey everybody, great presentation, really enjoyed it. I have two questions. My first question is, you showed that map in the presentation about how all of these EV investments are going into mostly going into right to work anti-union states. I might have missed some of this, but is that pretty much just purely directed by kind of capital wanting to cut labor costs, or is there anything in like the Biden administration EV policy that encourage that? And if do you have ideas for like how to what types of policies would be better designed to avoid those capital flows? And then I'll ask my second question after this one.
I could quickly directly respond. So there's a big limitation in the Inflation Reduction Act provisions, which is that the requirements were on prevailing wage, not on unionization, like strict unionization requirements. So that sort of enabled the money to flow more broadly than just channeling it to kind of union plants. And the reality is that there was already ongoing investment in the South. And so Biden's money sort of kind of turbocharged that and gave the companies more confidence. I think, like we're saying, if you, like this presentation highlights, if you want to start to upend that the corporate decision-making dominance, you really have to even the playing field on how easy it is to union, or reducing limitation on unionization efforts, and helping workers actually be able to unionize those plants. And then, there are other policies that you don't have to go through private structures to actually manufacture these things. So we're pretty far from that, and the federal government's not interested in that right now, but these are real ideas that could be raised.
Okay, cool. And then my second question is, so I'm not in the I don't work in the auto industry, so forgive my ignorance, but auto workers in Canada are affiliated with the UAW. Auto workers in Mexico do not have that same affiliation, is my understanding. Like, what are some of the barriers to why is that, and what are some of the barriers to um cooperating more with Mexican workers and Mexican unions? And is there, do people have ideas about strategy to improve that solidarity and cooperation with Mexican auto workers and trade unions?
Well, I was going to comment first on the first question that all I know is for that Ford, the companies, I guess, decide, right, where they want to put their next plants. And they are building this Blue Oval City in Kentucky and Tennessee, which, they know is right to work states. And because of their joint ventures, meaning like they're going in with another company, they're saying, well, these don't have to be union plants like Ford plants are. But that's why we fought in our last contract to at least get in the, our foot in the door as far as being able to organize those plants. And so they will be union and have the same benefits as Ford workers, across the board. As far as Canada, I know they're represented by Unifor, and they are, I guess they are represented on our list that we get, that big three employees get, like, oh, buy American, buy union, buy UAW or Unifor made products. They never put anything from Mexico, which I know they have some unions, or they are fighting for unions. And I met some great workers like Israel Cervantes from GM, who was fired for trying to start a union. And, there are unions in Brazil that have, GM plants. So we met some of those workers. They came to our picket line in Chicago and things like that. So I don't know if anybody else wants to comment on that. Oh, if not, I guess we can move on to our next question with our speaker, which would be Andrew. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Andrew Bergman. I'm on the UAWD steering committee, also on the electric vehicle committee. Excited to see all this come into existence. And yeah, I work at Detroit Hamtramck, GM's EV facility in Detroit, a member of Local 22. I wanted to say, I think that Tully or Marcy mentioned this earlier, but the goal is to bring this presentation to locals, and have this work be something that's brought actually to the shop floor. Maybe actually gin a discussion and actually lead to organizing on the floor around these, especially when closures or layoffs come up. Sorry, it's a little loud here. So I think, I'm planning to do that at Local 22 with Tully and others. We got a great Local 22 group here, shout out. And I know that Marcy is planning to do that at Local 551. If anyone else is interested in that, we'd love to have you be a part of that effort. I also kind of just wanted to go back to, I think a point that was core in this presentation regarding just this being the corporate-led EV transition. Like the thing that's happening now, as chaotic and weird as it is, with the tariffs, with the regulation rollbacks, like that's part of what happens when corporations are leading this. They chase profit. They look to make money, and they, whether they see Trump as an enemy or an ally or whatever the hell they are, they're clearly working with him because they got their exemption for the tariffs. Like, this is part of it. They're just going to try to make money wherever they can, and if that means that they're going to slow it down or kind of reverse it for a few years and then go back to turbocharging it when it's favorable, they're going to do that. But their goal has nothing to do with addressing climate change or making lives better. It's about making money. So my question is, if that like resonates to other folks here who have thought less about that, does that seem right to you? I'm kind of curious, like, do you feel like that is what's happening? Do you feel like the corporations and Trump are on opposing sides? Are they working together? Like, I'm just curious for people that work at plants, especially, like, does that connect with what you're hearing on the floor? Does that feel off? Because I think it would be exciting to get a sense from people, like, how that connects to your experience. It certainly connects to mine.
Thank you, Andrew. Let's take a couple more comments because I know we're short on time. I have on stack Frank, Ron, Judy, and then Dennis put a question in the comments, and then Bruce. And I think that's a good spot because there's 2-3 minutes per person. So go ahead, Frank.
Thank you, Marcy, and thank you all. And I think that this is an extraordinary production that you've done. I think it's certainly in the vanguard of working class environmental consciousness, and I think it really needs to be commended. I have a couple of comments. One is, and what you've had to challenge is not only the question of conversion, but you've also, in the meantime, had to challenge the whole question of tariffs, and it's really become laden with a lot of content. One of the things that I would urge is that there's some consciousness that comes through this webinar about the environmental movement in solidarity with our unions. And we have a very good example of that at the beginning of the strike, when 100 environmental organizations, including climate organizations, signed on to in solidarity with the UAW. And I think that's something that we want to cultivate. And then the other thing is that the environmental movement and the climate crisis effort is, of course, global. And there are movements across the seas, like, for example, in Europe, the Environmental Union, which is attempting to do the same thing that's being done here. And it would be really wonderful for workers who see this presentation to understand that we're not alone and that we actually have solidarity movements around the world that are trying to build a better world than where we're headed. And that leads to my final remark, and that is that there is a real sense of urgency in terms of the climate clock. And I think that while you made a presentation at the beginning with the pointing out the climate crisis, I think the urgency of time and the non-negotiation with physical science is very important to bring across. But again, thank you very, very much for this presentation and your endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Next, we'll go to Ron Lair.
So I'd like to once again welcome the UAW Local 600 members who are in the meeting. I agree with what Herman said. I think the tariffs are bad news for workers. I think they'll raise prices for everybody. And tariff wars increase international tensions. They can even lead to shooting wars. I'm very much opposed to the UAW statement on Trump and tariffs. I won't go into the details, of course, in a short statement. But I think these tariffs could wreck the economies of the US, Mexico, and Canada And that's part of what they would do to hurt workers. But they also hurt the spirit of international solidarity across borders, which we need to oppose the companies. A long time ago, actually, somebody from the administration caucus said to me, the companies went international, we didn't. The workers' movement needs to go international too. But to do the things that have been laid out in this forum, which I think was excellent, I think workers and unions need political strength too, and I don't think that can come through the Democrats and Republicans. There's a movement against Trump nationally that I think the UAW should be part of, not trying to conciliate Trump, but to be part of the leadership of that movement. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Before we move on, I just want to encourage if there are any active workers here that want to share what they thought of this presentation and how it might resonate with their coworkers. So for next up, we have Judy. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'm retired from Local 600, and I was on the Tool and Die Executive Board for many terms as a radical. So, be of good cheer. You can actually succeed at 600 and other locals. But I do want to bring up, the question was about, can we unite with Canadian or Mexican workers, or anybody for that matter? And the reality is that we have laws in the US, the Taft-Hartley law, that prevents support strikes. And for anything, like for instance, you cannot have a political demand strike. You cannot have a social demand strike. The law is called Taft-Hartley, and it says that you can only strike against your own employer with respect to concerns regarding that employer. So even if Ford Mexico or Ford Canada struck, the US Ford could not strike in support of those people. So we need to get rid of those laws, which for me means getting rid of both political parties and forming a workers' party, Labor Party, which 9 unions in the early 2000s did try to do. And really, we need to be talking in our plants about this, because people keep thinking that changing the political face of one of the two parties in any level is going to make our lives better. And I'm 78, and I can tell you some things have gotten better.
Do you have old
but
pictures on
not
your
on the
PC or
basis of
smartphone?
life. And I'm out. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. I was wondering if Dennis would like to speak. If not, he put his comments in the chat. That's fine. But hello, Dennis. I know you from Chicago Teachers Union and nurse.
Just inside this conversation, just listening and trying to learn.
Go ahead, Dennis.
No, just saying I'm on the outside of this conversation, not an auto work. I'm just listening and trying to learn and understand.
Okay, thank you. Good to have you here. All right, next, Bruce.
Hello. There are two things on the immediate horizon, one of which, of course, is the EV transition, which you've been talking about. The other thing on the immediate horizon is the renegotiation of the U.S., Canada, and Mexico trade agreement. And contrary to what is going on with tariffs, what I think is really called for here is for workers in Canada, the United States, and Mexico to put their heads together and come up with a program or a set of demands to be incorporated in the U.S., Canada, Mexico trade agreement, which makes it a worker-friendly trade agreement oriented towards our goals and not those of capital. And I think so. Basically, what I'm saying is that people from the three unions should get together around this and address this trade agreement, what should be in it, and in the process, they can take on the issue of the EV transition.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. And Toli?
Yeah, thanks. But Chad, did you have your hand up? Did you want to speak before me?
Yeah, sorry, I can't see the whole.
That's all right. I can just go. And yeah, I would love just re-upping kind of Andrew's ask. I think one thing that would love to just get feedback from everyone here, just to hear how you think this conversation, this presentation could, if there's any amendments or reframing that you all could think of when we actually bring this to the shop floor to talk to workers. In a lot of ways, this presentation was kind of a sort of a practice run. It's sort of our first sort of open presentation, but I think it's also an ongoing and evolving thing as we think about what the best way to kind of raise these points and just get people's understanding and political analysis up. And I just wanted to touch on the questions that Dennis is asking in the chat, and that is, like when we're talking about a pro-worker policy, the contradictions in international trade, given a market capitalist system, just make it any kind of trade policy that you put in place. This is how I think about it. It's going to create contradictory benefits and harms. Like in the 80s and in the 90s, when NAFTA was put in place, the elimination, the opening up free trade in North America meant that capital could move around. Humans couldn't move around, but capital could. And so you might say, well, like tariffs are bad because they kind of pit they insulate economies, so let's get rid of them. Well, that allowed capital to move around and start whipsawing based on different wages and labor costs, and overall undermining workers in both countries. But right now, given that capital has already moved from the US to Canada and Mexico, putting tariffs might be a move to hurt Canadian and Mexican workers. So that's the current kind of the board is set in a different way now, and imposing tariffs has a different effect than it might have had in the past. So that's why, for me, the way I think about it is we should be advocating for a planning approach, and it doesn't mean that like hitting the whole economy with a tariff is not planning. It is right now what's happening, I think, is really kind of political leverage that Trump is trying to build. But there seem to be reasonable, limited ways that you might want to help kind of insulate workers within an industry that's paired with kind of pro-worker domestic policy if you're using kind of tariffs in a complementary way. But without a planning perspective, you're basically just having capital and these corporations benefit in different ways. So I think the other big point is to de-emphasize, the focus on tariffs. That actually, well, if you're serious about workers, you should be, passing universal health care and the PRO Act, and even more than just the PRO Act, and doing industrial planning. And I think it's our job to sort of reframe that conversation to some extent.
Thanks, Toli. Okay, so anyone else? I think Chad might have had their hand up. Did you have a question or comment? If not, go ahead.
Hey, how's it going? Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, no, I thought you guys were really good. I liked it. I don't know too much about EVs. Now, I've been in a Tesla. I thought about buying a Maverick, a hybrid. I love the environment idea. I know I work with the standing committee. We've done been to a garden with friends, family of River Rouge, with chaplaincy. We go to Gleaners. I know they had an event today. I think that was more standing committee of Feed of the Homeless. My thing is, I don't understand too much about the environment and the ozone. And with mining the lithium, is that better than coal? Is that better than oil? I would like to know that. I did some research, and you guys are spot on, right? You got Bloomberg, June 2022, 2023, 9.2 billion loan to Ford Motor Company. I'd like to hear more about that. That was part of the 400 billion plan and the green technology and that was the 3 battery factories that you guys brought up. And I didn't even know. I recommend the app to people all the time, the Blue Oval app, and they're part of that. That's pretty interesting. I just would like to know, I guess, what is our agenda? What is the plan? What do we want to do? Because the mandate for 2032 for the vehicles to be electric, or at least 2/3 of them, that kind of scared me. I know that's kind of pushed away, and I don't like mandates. That's something that I'm just not. For me, I was part-time with Ford for 5 years. I was making about 30,000 a year. You didn't get profit sharing. You didn't get days off. I'm 3rd generation. Some family members I called, they hung up on me, and look at me now. I mean, I was alternate committee person, backup team leader. So I think what I would like, and I understand this is kind of more political and this is more EVs and this and that, but I want to get back to kind of human nature. I grew up watching a lot of cowboy movies. I don't know if you guys are into Yellowstone. It's I would like locals to have gardens that keep helping other people, and I know that people are on drugs and they got mental health awareness and they don't want help. They kind of want to keep doing that. I would just like us to keep doing what we're doing in communities and talking with neighbors and things like that. So I just want to say thank you for letting me come on here and talk, and thought you guys did a good job, and can't wait for the next one and to learn
Thank you.
more. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Chad. A lot of great questions there. And on the sake of time, I just want to, add a little about, for my plant, I know, talking about this in our Facebook groups, people are concerned about their jobs. We make ICE vehicles, not EVs. They say that our plant is not equipped or able to make EVs, but if that's what, the companies are saying what the future is. A lot of people are against EVs, but yet I see more and more in the parking lot. They just installed a dozen new chargers. EVs are, essentially less of a carbon footprint on the planet, but you're still extracting from the earth and taking from indigenous lands. We do have to steer away from fossil fuels for the sake of the planet, for the sake of our lives. But the answer is not necessarily, what the companies want everybody just to replace their car with another car. Let's go from gas to electric. That's still, still causes traffic. I live in Chicago. It's a big city. There's always traffic jams. We need to focus more on mass transit, high-speed rail, things we can be making, as workers to secure our livelihoods, but not necessarily contribute to the destruction of the planet. I've been. And when I post or share this information, some people say I'm being ridiculous and fear-mongering. But everybody has their own opinions. I just encourage everyone to get educated and, organize, and because this is what we're going to have to do for the sake of our planet. If there's anything else, we got a bunch of comments in the chat. I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything to close us out, but thank you all for coming. And I hope you share this information with your coworkers, friends, neighbors, etc.
Thanks all. Have a good rest of your Saturday.
Thank you. Bye.